The Aurora crown did not just move through space, it presided over it. The vessel was a kilometer-long needle of spun glass and silver alloy, a technological jewel designed to humiliate the stars with its own brilliance. Outside the panoramic viewing ports of the upper decks, the azure nebula unfolded like a bruised orchid, vast ribbons of cobalt and violet gas stretching across light years of emptiness. But the passengers inside rarely looked out. They were too busy looking at each other. This was the maiden voyage of the Peace Initiative, a floating diplomatic summit intended to bridge the icy silence between the Terran Federation and the Sarathi Confederacy. The ticket price alone could have purchased a small moon colony. Inside the grand atrium, gravity was synthesized to a perfect 1.0 Earth standard. The air smelled of ozone and expensive orchid synthetics, and the champagne flowed like water from a glacier. It was a masterpiece of political theater, a fragile bubble of civilization drifting through the hard vacuum of a sector that had been a war zone less than 10 years ago. Lyra stood near a pillar of transparent aluminum, watching the light from the nebula wash over the crowd. She was technically the cultural liaison for the Sarathi delegation, a title that meant she was paid to look exotic, harmless, and informative. She played the part to perfection. She was tall, even for her species, with the fluid, elongated grace of a predator that had evolved in low-gravity rainforests. Her skin was a pale, iridescent violet that seemed to absorb the ambient light and refract it back in softer hues. Beneath the sheer, shimmering fabric of her floor-length gown, her bioluminescent markings drifted slowly across her skin like living constellations. To the humans in the room, the glowing patterns were beautiful, a sign of her alien physiology reacting to the music and the atmosphere. To a Sarathi, they would have read as a localized stress response, a biological warning sign that she was coiled tight, ready to strike. She took a sip of the flavorless sparkling water in her flute. Her eyes, which shifted from amber to deep indigo depending on the angle of the light, scanned the room with practiced boredom. In reality, she was cataloging exits, counting security personnel, and noting the response times of the automated service drones. The dress she wore was a marvel of Sarathi silk weaving, clinging to her form like a second skin. It was also a lie. Concealed within the intricate folds of the bodice were ceramic throwing blades, invisible to metal detectors. Pressed against the base of her skull, beneath her swept-up hair, was a neural dampener and a trigger implant. She was not a diplomat. She was a weapon that had been smuggled on board in plain sight, wrapped in silk and diplomacy. Lyra adjusted her posture, letting her shoulders slump slightly to mimic relaxation. She hated them. She hated the humans with their loud voices and their smell of cooked meat and anxiety. She hated the Sarathi collaborators who clinked glasses with the species that had strip-mined their outer colonies. But mostly, she hated the waiting. Across the room, a burst of laughter drew her attention. Jace Calder was holding court at the center of a group of minor dignitaries and corporate heiresses. He looked like every other son of Earth's political elite, handsome in a symmetrical, manufactured way, with a jawline that could cut glass and hair that looked perfectly tousled by a wind that did not exist indoors. He wore a midnight blue tuxedo that probably cost more than Lyra's childhood home. 100 credits says the senator's son passes out before the jump to light speed. A human woman whispered near Lyra, giggling behind her hand. Jace threw his head back and laughed at something a portly logistics magnate said, slapping the man on the shoulder with bonhomie. He swirled a glass of amber liquid, looking for all the world like a man whose only worry was the quality of the caviar. I heard he crashed 3 sky cars in New Paris last year, another voice murmured. Lyra narrowed her eyes. She had been observing Calder for 20 minutes. He was good, she had to admit. His laugh was loud and infectious, drawing attention to his face and away from his hands. But Lyra noticed what the others missed. She saw how his eyes didn't smile when his mouth did. She saw how he positioned himself with his back to the thickest structural wall, never leaving his blind spot exposed. And every time a security guard rotated through the room, Jace's gaze would flick toward them for a fraction of a second, clocking their weapon loadout before returning to the flirtatious blonde hanging on his arm. He was not a drunk playboy. He was a hunter pretending to be a grazing animal. The social atmosphere in the lounge was beginning to thicken with alcohol and forced camaraderie. A musical ensemble played a fusion of Terran jazz and Sarathi harmonic chimes, a jarring combination that seemed to symbolize the entire voyage. Near the buffet, a human diplomat was trying to explain a concept to High Counselor Vrail, an elderly Sarathi with skin like cracked parchment. "It is a simple gesture of goodwill," the human said, gesturing with a cracker. "We are just breaking the ice." Vrail recoiled, his neck frills flaring in genuine alarm. "Why would you destroy frozen water?" Vrail asked, his voice clicking with confusion. "Is the ice an enemy of the state? Or is this a threat regarding the ship's environmental controls?" The human blinked, then laughed nervously. No. It is just an expression. It means we are starting a conversation. Just like if I said this party costs an arm and a leg. I do not mean literal limbs." Vrail looked horrified, his bioluminescence pulsing a sick pale green. "You barter limbs for entertainment?" Vrail asked, his voice rising. "This is the barbarism we were warned about. You chop off appendages to pay for music?" A ripple of awkward silence spread through the immediate vicinity, followed by a wave of embarrassed human laughter as they tried to explain the nuance of metaphors to a species that communicated primarily through literal bioluminescent shifts. Lyra watched the exchange with a mixture of amusement and bitterness. It was pathetic. Two species trying to share a galaxy when they could not even share a conversation without accidental threats of mutilation. She turned to leave the lounge, needing a moment of silence before the signal came. She moved toward the aft corridor, her silk dress rustling like dry leaves. Jace Calder excused himself from his admirers a moment later, claiming the need for fresh air, which was an absurdity on a hermetically sealed starship. He slipped out the same exit Lyra had taken, loosening his tie as soon as the heavy blast doors hissed shut behind him. The corridor was quiet, lined with plush carpeting and soft, indirect lighting. The hum of the engines was louder here, a deep vibration that resonated in the bones. Jace saw the Sarathi woman ahead of him. She walked with a fluid, dangerous grace that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He had read her file. Lyra. Cultural liaison. Clean record. But she moved like a Black Ops agent in a high-threat zone. He sped up slightly, intending to pass her, when the deck plates beneath them groaned. The artificial gravity generators on the Aurora Crown were state-of-the-art, which meant they were over-engineered and prone to complex failures. For a heartbeat, the physics of the corridor inverted. Up became sideways. The 1.0 G-force vanished, replaced by a sickening lurch of weightlessness, followed instantly by a double gravity slam as the compensators kicked back in. Lyra stumbled, her balance betraying her for a split second as the floor seemed to drop away. She pitched forward, her hands grasping for a handrail that was too far away. Jace reacted without thinking. His reflex was instantaneous and professional. He lunged forward, his left hand shooting out to catch her by the upper arm, his right hand bracing against the bulkhead to stabilize them both. He hauled her upright just as the gravity stabilized with a bone-jarring thud. For 3 seconds, they were frozen in a chaotic tableau. Jace's hand was clamped firmly around her bicep. Her hand was gripping the lapel of his tuxedo. The contact was electric. Through the thin fabric of her dress, Jace felt the heat of her skin. It was warmer than a human's, radiating a dry, intense fever heat. And she was heavy, not fat, but dense. Her bone structure was solid, her muscle tone rigid. This was not the arm of a woman who spent her days arranging flower displays. Lyra, in turn, froze. The human smelled of expensive cologne and fear. But beneath that, there was a scent she had not expected, something elemental, like rain hitting hot stone. And his grip was iron. He had caught her full weight with one arm and hadn't even grunted. His fingers were positioned perfectly over the pressure points of her triceps. If he wanted to, he could paralyze her arm with a single squeeze. She pulled away sharply, her bioluminescence flaring a bright, warning crimson before fading back to violet. She smoothed her dress, her face composing itself into a mask of cool disdain. Careful. Mr. Calder, Lyra said, her voice a low, melodic thrum. If you handle the merchandise too roughly, you might break a nail. Jace held up his hands in a mock surrender, a charming, crooked grin sliding back onto his face. Just trying to keep you from face-planting, sweetheart. The gravity on these luxury tubs is always twitchy. You are surprisingly solid for someone who looks like she is made of moonlight. And you are surprisingly quick for a man who has consumed 3 glasses of vintage scotch in the last hour, Lyra countered, her eyes narrowing. Jace's grin didn't falter, but his eyes went cold and hard, matching hers. I have a high metabolism and good reflexes. It comes from dodging alimony payments. Lyra stepped closer, invading his personal space. She looked up at him, her shifting eyes searching his face. You pretend to be a fool. Jace called her. But fools do not catch falling bodies with tactical precision. And you pretend to be a diplomat, Jace replied softly, dropping his voice so only she could hear. But diplomats do not have calluses on their trigger fingers. I felt them when you grabbed my jacket. The air between them crackled. It was not just suspicion, it was recognition. They were 2 sharks circling in a goldfish pond, suddenly realizing they were not the only predator in the water. Lyra smiled, and it was a terrifyingly beautiful thing. Enjoy your walk, Mr. Calder. Try not to fall off the ship. She turned and walked away, her hips swaying with a hypnotic rhythm. Jace watched her go, the smile fading from his face. He rubbed his thumb against his fingertips, still feeling the phantom heat of her alien skin. Trouble, he whispered to the empty corridor. She is pure trouble. 40 minutes later, Lyra sat in the dark of her private stateroom. The room was luxurious, filled with velvet furniture and crystal sculptures. But she had stripped it of comfort. The lights were off. The only illumination came from the holographic display hovering above her wristcom. The face of Kale floated in the air, distorted by encryption artifacts. Kale was a legend among the Sarathi radicals, a scarred, brutal visionary who believed that peace with humans was just a slow form of surrender. Half his face was synthetic, a reminder of a Terran drone strike that had leveled his village. Is the package in place? Kale's voice was a grinding rasp. Lyra stared at the projection. We are secure. The internal sensors in the main lounge have been looped. The weapons cache in the cargo hold is unlocked. And you? Kyle asked. Are you ready to do what is necessary? Lyra hesitated. She thought of the human child she had seen in the corridor earlier, holding a stuffed toy. She thought of the way the nebula light hit the glass. I am ready, she said, forcing her voice to be steel. But Kale. There are civilians. Hundreds of them. Children. War does not have civilians. Lyra, Kale snapped. It only has targets and collateral. These humans live in luxury while our people rot in the mining colonies of Sector 7. They drink water that costs more than a life. Do not let their soft skin fool you. They are parasites. I know what they are, Lyra said quietly. Then execute the plan. At the signal, you become the face of the revolution. Make them fear you. Make them look at you and see their own end. The connection cut. Lyra sat in the darkness, the silence ringing in her ears. She touched the hidden release on her gown. The silk pooled at her feet. Beneath it, she wore a black tactical bodysuit, sleek and armored, woven with kinetic dampening fibers. She began to strap on her gear, mag boots, a plasma pistol on her hip, a bandolier of flashbangs. She looked in the mirror. The diplomat was gone. The monster looked back, 3 decks down, in a stateroom that smelled of stale, recycled air and tension. Jace Calder was staring at a similar screen. The face looking back at him was human, old, and tired. Director Halloway of Naval Intelligence. We are picking up increased chatter on the encrypted bands, Halloway said. Something is going down. Jace, we think the cell is active on board. I know, Jace said, checking the charge on his concealed sonic emitter. I made contact with one of them, Lyra. The liaison. She is carrying what? Herself. She moves like a gargoyle. If she is a diplomat, I am the Queen of England. I should take her out now before it starts. Negative, Halloway ordered sharply. Your mission is surveillance. We need to know who she talks to, who is funding them. If you engage now, you burn the operation. You do not intervene unless the ship becomes a direct threat to Earth. Jace let out a bitter laugh. Unless, that is my favorite word. It is the word that usually gets everyone killed while we wait for paperwork. Stick to the mission. Calder. Observe. Report. Do not be a hero. The screen went black. Jace sighed and reached into his suitcase. He pulled out a sleek, heavy pulse pistol and tucked it into the hidden holster at the small of his back. He adjusted his jacket, ensuring the line of the suit remained unbroken. Observe and report, he muttered. Sure. And when the shooting starts, I will be sure to take rigorous notes. He poured the rest of his expensive scotch down the sink and walked out the door. The hijack did not start with a speech. It started with silence. At exactly 2100 hours ship time, the hum of the ventilation system cut out. The music in the observation lounge faltered and died. The lights flickered once, twice, and then bathed the room in a harsh, emergency crimson. Then came the sound, a deep, resonant boom that vibrated through the hull plates. The primary blast doors slammed shut with the finality of a guillotine, sealing the exits. Screams erupted from the passengers. A woman dropped her glass, the crystal shattering on the floor. From the service vents and the staff elevators, they emerged. Figures clad in dark, angular exosuits, their faces hidden behind sleek, featureless masks that glowed with a single vertical slit of red light. They moved with terrifying efficiency. Weapons raised. Get down! A distorted voice roared over the room's speakers. On the floor. Now! Panic. Chaos. People scrambled over furniture, overturning tables. A security guard reached for his sidearm and was instantly cut down by a bolt of blue stun fire that sent him convulsing to the carpet. Jace Calder dropped to his knees with the rest of the terrified elite, his hands clasped behind his head. He made a show of hyperventilating, his eyes wide with feigned terror. Oh God, do not shoot," he stammered. cowering behind a velvet sofa. But while his body shook with fake sobs, his eyes were razor-sharp. He was scanning the room. 12 hostiles. Standard kinetic rifles. Dispersion formation. They are securing the perimeter first. Pros, these are not amateurs. He watched the blast doors, and they were sealed. The comms would be jammed. They were trapped in a gilded cage. Then, the main doors at the top of the grand staircase hissed open. Lyra walked in. She had shed the last remnants of her disguise. She wore the black tactical armor, her bioluminescence flaring in jagged, aggressive spikes of crimson and electric blue against her violet skin. She held a heavy plasma rifle with casual ease, the barrel resting against her shoulder. She wore no mask. Her face was bare, striking and terrifying in the red emergency light. She stopped at the top of the stairs, looking down at the sea of cowering billionaires and politicians. She looked like a goddess of war carved from amethyst and hate. The room fell into a terrified silence. The only sound was the weeping of a child. Lyra raised her chin. She tapped a command into her wrist unit, and her voice was amplified, booming through the lounge with a resonance that rattled the teeth. "I am Lyra of the Free Sarathi Accord," she announced. "The Aurora Crown is now under revolutionary control." She walked down the stairs, her boots ringing on the metal steps. The masked terrorists parted for her, bowing their heads in deference. "You have spent your lives sitting on thrones built from the bones of my people," Lyra said, her voice dripping with cold venom. "Tonight, you will learn what it feels like to be powerless." She signaled to a terrorist holding a camera drone. The device hovered in front of her face, its red recording light blinking. "Broadcast this," she commanded. "To Earth, to the Confederacy, to everyone." She looked directly into the lens, her eyes shifting to a deep, void-like black. "Tell them that the peace is a lie. Tell them that a spaceship was hijacked by alien terrorists. Tell them the war has begun." From his position on the floor, peering through the gap between two armchairs, Jace watched her. He saw the power she projected, the fear she commanded. But he also saw something else. As Lyra finished her speech, her gaze flicked to the side. She looked at a human mother clutching a toddler to her chest. For a fraction of a second, so fast that a blink would have missed it, Lyra's face crumpled. The bioluminescence on her neck dimmed, shifting to a soft, sorrowful blue before she forced it back to angry crimson. Her hand tightened on her rifle, her knuckles whitening. "You do not want to do this," Jace thought, a jolt of surprise hitting him. "You are talking big, sweetheart, but you are sick to your stomach." He catalogued the hesitation. It was a weakness, a crack in the armor, and in his line of work, a crack was all you needed to bring the whole wall down. He shifted his weight, his knee brushing against the hidden pistol at his back. He stayed down, playing the part of the useless, terrified rich boy. "Please," someone shouted, "just take the money. We have credits." Lyra ignored them. She turned to her lieutenant. "Secure the bridge. Lock in the new coordinates." "Where are we going?" the lieutenant asked, his voice modulated by his mask. Lyra looked out the viewport at the blue nebula, now stained red by the emergency lights. "Sector 9, the militarized zone. We are taking them into the dark." The ship groaned as the massive engines fired, fighting the inertia of its previous course. The stars outside the window shifted, blurring into streaks of light as the Aurora Crown banked hard, turning away from Earth, away from the Sarathi homeworlds, and toward the forbidden depths of deep space. On millions of screens across the galaxy, the breaking news banner flashed red, interrupting soap operas and weather reports. The anchor's face was pale as the first grainy images of Lyra's face appeared on screen. We interrupt this broadcast with a developing story of unparalleled gravity. The voiceover began, grave and trembling. A spaceship was hijacked by alien terrorists. Jace Calder closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Slowing his heart rate. "Game on," he whispered. The transition from luxury liner to high-altitude prison was terrifyingly seamless. 12 hours into the hijack, the Aurora Crown had become a different world. The ambient lighting, once a soft imitation of a Terran dawn, was now a harsh, flat gray designed to inhibit sleep. The corridors, previously alive with the rustle of silk and the murmur of deal-making, were sealed by heavy blast doors and patrolled by Sarathi militants in exosuits that whirred with hydraulic menace. Security drones, their friendly blue sensors hacked to burn a hostile red, drifted through the vaulted ceilings like angry hornets, scanning for any sudden movements. In the grand atrium, 300 of the galaxy's wealthiest citizens sat in clusters on the imported carpet. The champagne fountains had been turned off, leaving sticky, sweet-smelling puddles drying on the marble. The air recycling system had been throttled back to conserve power, and the room was beginning to smell of expensive perfume turning sour with sweat and fear. Lyra moved through the hostages like a shark gliding through a coral reef. She had removed her helmet, letting her violet skin and the shifting constellations of her bioluminescence do the intimidation work for her. She did not shout. She did not brandish her weapon wildly. She simply walked, and the crowd parted. When a wealthy Terran banking heir began to hyperventilate, his sobs echoing off the glass walls, a Sarathi guard stepped forward, raising the butt of his rifle to strike. Lyra's voice cracked through the air, sharp as a whip. "Stand down!" The guard froze. Lyra approached the weeping man. She towered over him, her shadow stretching long across the floor. She crouched, her movements fluid and predatory, until her face was level with his. Her eyes shifted from amber to a soothing, hypnotic indigo. "Breathe," she said softly. The sound was melodic, almost maternal, yet edged with steel. "We are not butchers. Despite what your news feeds tell you, you are currency, and we do not damage our currency unless it loses its value. Do you understand?" The man nodded frantically, wiping snot from his upper lip with a silk handkerchief. "Good," Lyra murmured, standing up. She cast a glance around the room, her voice rising just enough to carry to the corners. "Everyone stays calm, and everyone stays alive. Panic, and I let the guards off the leash. They are far less patient than I am." Jace Calder watched her from his spot near a decorative fern. He had discarded his tuxedo jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and loosened his tie, cultivating the image of a disheveled, defeated party boy. But his eyes were clear. "She is good," he thought. "She is playing them. She gives them a taste of fear, then offers herself as the only protection from it. Classic psychological domination. She is not just a soldier. She is a handler." He looked away before she could catch him staring and turned his attention to the small circle of people he had managed to gather around him. They looked like a bad joke setup. A retired admiral, a logistics tycoon, a stand-up comedian, a biotech CEO, and a socialite. "So," Jace whispered, leaning in as if sharing a secret about the stock market. "Hypothetically speaking, if someone wanted to make a profound nuisance of themselves, who here has a skill set that does not involve ordering bottle service?" Admiral Vance, a woman in her 70s with hair like steel wool and a spine that refused to bend even sitting on the floor, snorted. Her evening gown was wrinkled, but her glare was military grade. "I commanded the Third Fleet during the siege of Antares," she grumbled. I can snap a neck with my cane if I have to, but these knees are not what they used to be. I move boxes. Marcus, the logistics magnate, whispered. He was a large man who looked like he was made of dough, but his eyes were sharp. Big boxes, interstellar shipping routes. I know the layout of this class of ship better than the designers. I know where the blind spots are in the cargo sensors. Lenny, the comedian, was shaking. I tell jokes. He squeaked. That is it. I can make a joke about how we are all going to die. Humor keeps morale up, Jace said, patting him on the shoulder. You are the distraction. I have implants, Dr. Eris whispered. The biotech CEO tapped her temple. Illegal ones. Sensory boosters. I can hear the guards talking 2 rooms away. They are nervous. They keep asking when the course correction will be finished. Jace nodded. Filing that away. And you? He looked at Elena, the socialite. She was wearing a dress that was mostly straps and sequins, looking bored. She was checking her manicure. I was a dancer, she said flatly. Jace raised an eyebrow. You move well? I saw you pivot when the gravity glitched earlier. Center of gravity never shifted. Ballet? Lenny asked. Covert ops, Elena murmured, not looking up. Sector 6. I retired. The dress is camouflage. Do not blow my cover or I will kill you with this nail file. Jace grinned. A team of psychopaths and misfits. My favorite kind. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver cigarette case. It looked like a standard luxury accessory, but when he pressed a sequence of hidden studs on the filigree, a small holographic display projected onto the inside of the lid. It was a localized signal sniffer he had smuggled through customs in his shaving kit. I am picking up their comms traffic, Jace muttered, angling the case so only the group could see. Standard encryption. The Sarathi use a rolling frequency code. I can break it in an hour. He frowned as a second set of data scrolled across the tiny screen. That is odd, he said. What? Vance asked, leaning in. There is a shadow signal, Jace said. Look at the waveform. It is buried under the static of the ship's engines, highly sophisticated. It is not Sarathi tech. It looks... Terran, someone else is talking to the bridge. The government? Marcus asked. Maybe, Jace said. But why use a ghost channel? If they were negotiating, they would be on the main frequency. This is a back door. Someone is giving them orders, or feeding them data, and they do not want anyone to know about it. Jace snapped the case shut as a drone hovered nearby. We need to know what that signal is saying, he whispered. And to do that, I need to get closer to the source. Lyra stood in Cargo Bay 4, the cavernous space echoing with the hum of the atmospheric scrubbers. This was the forward operating base for the cell, far from the prying eyes of the hostages. Kale stood by a holographic chart table, his scarred face illuminated by the red tactical display. He was arguing with the ship's navigation computer, smashing his fist against the console when it chirped an error. The course is set, Lyra said, walking up behind him. Why are you fighting the nav comp? Because the ship is fighting me, Kale growled. The autopilot keeps trying to correct to the nearest shipping lane. I have locked it out, but the code is stubborn. Lyra looked at the star map. A dotted red line showed their trajectory. It curved away from the civilized sectors, diving deep into the uncontrolled territories. That is not the route to the Orion refugee station, Lyra said, her brow furrowing. We are taking the long way, Kale said dismissively. To avoid patrols, Lyra zoomed in on the map. Kale, this vector takes us through the Pellucid belt. The radiation there will scramble our long-range transmitters. If the plan is to broadcast a manifesto and demand a prisoner exchange, why are we going to a place where we cannot broadcast? Kale turned to her, his synthetic eye whirred, focusing on her face. You are a soldier. Lyra. Your job is to keep the livestock quiet. My job is the bigger picture. The bigger picture involves keeping us alive long enough to make a statement. Lyra shot back. If we go into the belt, we are ghosts. No one will hear us. It makes no sense. There are new orders, Kale said. He turned back to the console. High Command has arranged a rendezvous. We meet a contact in the belt. They will give us the codes to override the planetary defense grid of the Sarathi core worlds. A contact? Lyra asked. Who? You do not need to worry about it. I am the face of this operation. Kale, Lyra snapped, slamming her hand onto the table. If I am going to brand myself a terrorist for the rest of my life, I deserve to know who is pulling the strings. Kale spun around, grabbing her by the throat armor. He shoved her back against a stack of crates. He was strong, enhanced by combat stimulants, but Lyra did not flinch. You are a symbol, Kale hissed, his spit flying against her cheek. You are a pretty face for the cameras because the humans like looking at you even when they fear you. Do not mistake your utility for authority. You do what I say, or you go out the airlock with the rest of the trash. He released her and turned away. Get back to the lounge. I want hourly reports on the passengers, and watch the one with the expensive suit, the loud one. He is too comfortable. Lyra straightened her armor. She watched Kale's back, her mind racing. He is lying, she realized. There is no rendezvous. He is scared. He is following orders he does not understand. She turned and left the bay, the cold knot of suspicion tightening in her stomach. Back in the lounge, the atmosphere had shifted from panic to a dull, aching exhaustion. Jace was doing his rounds, offering water bottles to the elderly and cracking quiet jokes to the terrified staff. He was kneeling beside a young girl who was clutching a stuffed bear, making the bear dance on her knee, when a shadow fell over him. He looked up. Lyra was standing there. She looked like a storm cloud poured into a bodysuit. You, she said. Me? Jace pointed to his own chest, putting on his best innocent face. Just hydrating the masses, officer. Hydration is key to a compliant hostage demographic. Get up, Lyra said. She grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and hauled him to his feet. She marched him away from the group, pushing him toward a secluded alcove near the decorative waterfall. As soon as they were out of earshot, she spun him around and slammed him against the wall. Before he could react, she had a ceramic combat blade pressed against the soft skin just under his jaw. Jace froze. He could feel the cold edge of the knife and the hot radiation of her anger. He held his hands up, palms open. Okay, he said, his voice dropping the playboy affectation for a moment. You want to tell me what I did? Or is this just how you say hello? You are too calm, Lyra hissed. Her face was inches from his. He could see the intricate patterns of her iris, shifting like a kaleidoscope. Normal people are crying, or sleeping, or begging. You are working the room. I am a politician's son, Jace said, holding her gaze. I work rooms. It is a reflex. I am trying to keep people from freaking out. If they freak out, your goons start shooting. I would prefer not to get shot. Lyra pressed the blade harder. A tiny bead of blood welled up against the white steel. Do not lie to me, pretty porcelain, she whispered. I watched you. You check the exits every time you stand up. You count the guards. You look at me like you are trying to figure out how to take me apart. Jace swallowed. The nickname, Pretty Porcelain, was an insult, a reference to human fragility. but the way she said it felt intimate, almost like a caress. "I look at you because you are the most dangerous thing in the room," he said softly, "and because it is hard to look away." Lyra's eyes widened slightly. She had expected fear. She had expected denial. She had not expected the heavy, thrumming tension that suddenly filled the space between them. It was not romantic. It was the recognition of two predators scenting each other. "You are hiding something," she said, her voice dropping to a smoky register. "So are you," Jace countered. "You do not want to be here." "Lyra, I saw your face when you looked at that kid on You Are Playing the Monster, but the costume does not fit." Lyra pulled the knife back an inch, but she did not step away. Her breath hitched. "You are walking on a razor's edge. Human." "I like the view from here," Jace said. "Jace." For a long moment, they just breathed, the air charged with adrenaline and a confusing, sharp spike of arousal. It was wrong. They were enemies. She was holding a knife to his throat, but the chemistry was undeniable, a magnetic pull that defied logic. Lyra holstered the knife with a snap. She stepped back, smoothing her armor, her bioluminescence flashing a chaotic mix of colors. "Come with me," she ordered. "Excuse me? I need to inspect the lower decks. I need someone to carry the supplies. And I want to keep my eye on you." Jace rubbed his jaw where the blade had pressed. "You want me to be your luggage boy?" "I want you where I can see you," Lyra said. "Move." The journey through the ship's bowels was eerie. The Aurora Crown was a labyrinth of service corridors and maintenance tubes, far removed from the gold and glass of the upper decks. Here, pipes hissed with steam and the gravity plating hummed beneath their boots. Lyra walked ahead, her rifle held ready. Jace followed, carrying a heavy crate of ration packs they had collected from the storage bay. "So," Jace said, his voice echoing in the narrow metal hallway. "Is this part of the revolution? Making the elite do manual labor?" "Consider it a cultural exchange," Lyra said over her shoulder. "You learn what it is like to work. I learn how long it takes a human to complain. I have not complained yet. Give it time." They walked in silence for a moment. Jace watched the way she moved. She was constantly scanning, checking corners. She was professional. "You are not like the others," Jace said. "Kale. He is a fanatic. I can hear it in his voice. He wants to burn it all down. You seem like you just want to fix something." Lyra stopped. She turned to look at him. The corridor was dim, lit only by the emergency strips on the floor and the soft glow of her skin. "My sister died because a human corporation decided it was cheaper to dump chemical runoff into our water table than to process it," she said. The water glowed for weeks. She drank it. It burned her from the inside out. Jace went still. The flippant remark died on his tongue. "I am sorry," he said quietly. That is horrific." Lyra looked at him, searching for mockery and finding none. "My brother was on the colony of New Bristol," Jace said. "During the riots, a Sarathi bomber hit the marketplace. He was buying fruit. He was 19. Lyra flinched. The anger in her eyes softened into something more complex. Shared pain. It was a terrible foundation for a connection. But it was a foundation nonetheless. "We are both ghosts, then," she murmured, "haunted by the dead." "We do not have to be," Jace said. "We do not have to be what they made us." Before Lyra could respond, the ship screamed. It was not a sound so much as a physical sensation, a deep grinding tear that seemed to come from the very atoms of the hull. The lights flared blindingly bright, then died completely, plunging them into pitch blackness before the red emergency strobes kicked in. Then, gravity broke. It did not just fail. It went mad. The quantum stabilizer in the FTL core had hit a resonance feedback loop. Jace felt his stomach lurch into his throat. The floor dropped away. He was floating. But it wasn't just 0G. The corridor itself seemed to twist. The straight lines of the walls bent into impossible curves. The distance between him and Lyra stretched and compressed like a breathing lung. "Get down!" Lyra yelled, but there was no down. She was tumbling through the air, her limbs flailing as she tried to find purchase on a wall that was warping away from her. The crate of rations Jace had been holding exploded open, sending silver packets drifting through the air like confetti. Jace kicked off a bulkhead, propelling himself toward a handhold. He grabbed a pipe, the metal cold against his palm. "Lyra, grab something." She was spinning, disoriented by the shifting geometry. She slammed into the ceiling, which was now a wall, and gasped as the air was knocked out of her. Jace launched himself from the pipe. He flew across the corridor, intercepting her trajectory. He wrapped one arm around her waist and the other around a heavy support stanchion. The impact jarred his shoulder, but he held on. They were floating in the center of the corridor, their bodies pressed together, suspended in the red, strobing dark. Around them, small sparks of static electricity danced like fireflies, a side effect of the quantum field collapse. It was beautiful and terrifying. Lyra clung to him instinctively, her hands gripping his shirt. Her face was inches from his. In the zero gravity, her hair floated around her head like a halo of dark water. Her skin was glowing brightly, a frantic pulse of adrenaline-fueled light that illuminated Jace's face in shades of violet. "Are you hit?" Jace asked, his voice breathless. "No." Lyra gasped. Her eyes were wide, the pupils blown. The core. They messed with the core. They were drifting, turning slowly in the air. Jace could feel her heart hammering against his chest. He could feel the heat of her, the alien solidity of her form. His legs were tangled with hers. For a moment, the crisis faded. There was only the sensation of floating, of holding on to the only solid thing in a world that had lost its rules. Jace looked at her, really looked at her, in this light, with fear stripping away the masks. She was breathtaking. Lyra looked back. She saw the sweat on his brow, the intensity in his eyes. She saw the man who had caught her, the man who had lost a brother, the man who was holding her as if she were the most precious cargo on the ship. The air between them grew heavy, thick with a sudden, overwhelming intimacy. Their faces drifted closer. Jace's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. Lyra's breath hitched. She didn't pull away. She leaned in, drawn by a gravity that had nothing to do with the ship's engines. It was a fraction of a second, a hesitation that contained a universe of possibilities. Then, with a deafening clang, the backup stabilizers kicked in. Gravity returned with a vengeance. They fell. Jace hit the deck hard, taking the brunt of the impact, with Lyra landing on top of him. The air left his lungs in a pained wheeze. Lyra scrambled off him instantly, rolling to her feet in a crouch, her rifle instantly in her hands. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving. She looked down at Jace, who was groaning and clutching his ribs. She looked furious. Furious at the ship. Furious at Kale, but mostly furious at herself for that moment of weakness. For wanting, just for a second, to close that gap. "Get up," she snapped, though her voice lacked its usual bite. "We need to move, before it happens again." Jace sat up, wincing. "You are welcome, by the way, for the save." Lyra paused. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then she turned on her heel. Try to keep up, human. But she waited at the blast door for him to limp over before she opened it. That night, the ship was quiet, settling into an uneasy rhythm. Jace had been returned to the hostage-holding area, where he was currently pretending to sleep while actually debriefing Admiral Vance and Elena on the layout of the lower decks. Lyra sat in the communications array room. She had dismissed the guard, claiming she needed to run a diagnostic on the external sensors. She wasn't running a diagnostic. She was hunting. She pulled up the intercept logs Jace had hinted at, the encrypted traffic. She didn't have his decoding tech, but she had Sarathi military codes. She ran a cross-reference algorithm. It took 20 minutes. When the text finally unscrambled, Lyra felt the blood drain from her face. It was a communique from the Terran Defense Minister to a Sarathi High Counselor. Asset Kale is proceeding to the target zone. The Aurora Crown will arrive at the Pellucid Belt coordinates within 12 hours. Ensure the interceptor fleet is in position. No survivors. The destruction of the ship must look like a failed negotiation. We need a tragedy to ratify the war budget. Lyra read it again and again. No survivors. Asset Kale. They were not revolutionaries. They were not fighting for freedom. They were patsies. Kale was a tool being used to steer 300 people into a slaughterhouse, all to give the governments on both sides an excuse to start a war that would make the rich richer and the poor dead. The ethical line she thought she had crossed, the line between diplomat and terrorist, suddenly vanished. She wasn't a terrorist. She was a sacrifice. She switched the screen to the internal security feed. She cycled through the cameras until she found the main lounge. She zoomed in. Jace was awake. He was sitting with the little girl who had the bear. He was making shadow puppets on the wall with his hands. The girl was giggling, a tiny sound of joy in the midst of the nightmare. Jace was smiling, a real smile, soft and tired and kind. Lyra reached out and touched the screen, her finger tracing the line of his jaw. You knew, she thought. You sensed it. You pretty smart, dangerous man. She pulled her hand back as if the screen had burned her. She felt a crack in her chest, a fissure where the indoctrination was crumbling away, leaving something raw and tender exposed. She stood up. The bioluminescence on her skin shifted slowly from the angry red of the revolution to a deep, resolute white. She was done following orders. It was time to start breaking them. The galaxy was watching. On Earth, in the cavernous war room of the Terran Federation Defense Ministry. Holomaps of the neutral zone were being redrawn in angry crimson lines. Generals with too many medals and not enough patience were shouting about first strike capabilities and the sanctity of human life, conveniently forgetting the trillions of credits they had invested in the Sarathi arms trade. On the Sarathi throne world of Xylos, the High Council sat in a circle of floating obsidian chairs, debating the merits of a preemptive blockade. Their bioluminescence pulsed with the jagged staccato rhythms of aggression. They spoke of the Aurora Crown not as a ship full of people, but as a sovereignty violation, a pretext for the war they had been itching to start for a decade. And on the independent news networks that beamed into every hab block and orbital station from Mars to the Outer Rim, the narrative was being spun like gold thread. A spaceship was hijacked by alien terrorists, unaware that the elite human passengers reacted and might turn this into a war. A pundit with perfectly sculpted hair intoned, leaning into the camera with practiced gravity. The Chiron beneath him flashed, Crisis in the Nebula, Day 2. The universe was holding its breath, waiting for the explosion. On board the Aurora Crown, the air in the hostage-holding area was thick enough to chew. The ventilation systems were running on low power, recycling the same stale oxygen, fear, and body odor. Jace Calder sat in a tight circle with his motley crew of conspirators, Admiral Vance, Marcus the Logistics King, Lenny the comedian, Dr. Eris, and Elena the ex-spy. They were huddled behind a barricade of overturned plush armchairs, speaking in whispers that were barely audible over the hum of the ship's engines. "We need an inside man," Jace said, keeping his voice low. "We can map the vents and hack the door locks all we want. But unless we know what Kale is planning in real time, we are just guessing. And guessing gets us killed." "We have an inside man," Marcus muttered, shifting his bulk uncomfortably on the hard floor. You are the spy." "I am an observer," Jace corrected. "And right now, I am observing that we are flying blind. We need someone with access to the bridge, someone who knows the codes." "You want to flip a terrorist?" Elena asked, raising a perfectly arched eyebrow. "Good luck. They are fanatics. They have probably had their empathy centers surgically removed." "Not all of them," Jace said. He looked toward the blast doors, his mind drifting back to the moment in the zero-gravity corridor. The heat of her skin, the hesitation in her eyes. "I think I can turn Lyra." The group stared at him in silence. Then, Lenny snorted. "The glowing lady? The one who looks like she eats people for breakfast?" "She is the second in command," Jace argued. "She has access, and she is conflicted. I have seen it." "Oh, you have seen it, have you?" Dr. Eris whispered, tapping her temple implant. "My auditory sensors picked up your heart rate when you were walking with her earlier. It spiked, significantly. Are you sure you want to recruit her for the mission, or do you just have a thing for glowing murderers?" Jace felt a flush of heat rise up his neck. "It is tactical. She is the weak link in their chain of command. Tactical." "Right," Vance grunted. "Listen, son, I have seen that look before. Usually right before a lieutenant does something incredibly stupid for a girl from the wrong side of the asteroid belt. If you are wrong about her, she will put a plasma bolt through your head before you can say peace treaty." "I am not wrong," Jace said, his voice hardening. "She is scared, and she suspects something is off with the flight plan. I just need to give her a push." "And how do you plan to do that?" Elena asked. "Ask her out for coffee?" "No," Jace said, checking his watch. "I am going to make her arrest me." 10 minutes later, Jace stood near the sensor grid that monitored the perimeter of the hostage zone. It was a simple laser trip system easily avoided if you knew where to step. Jace deliberately stepped right through it. The alarm shrieked, a high, piercing wail that made half the hostages jump out of their skins. 2 Sarathi guards materialized from the shadows. Rifles raised, Jace held up his hands, putting on his best confused billionaire act. "I was just looking for the bathroom. The facilities in here are barbaric. Movement at the main doors." Lyra strode in, her face a mask of irritation. She saw Jace standing by the tripped sensor, surrounded by guards. "Of course," she muttered, stalking over to him. "Why is it always you?" "I have a small bladder," Jace offered weakly. "And a rebellious spirit." "Silence," Lyra snapped. She turned to the guards. "Reset the perimeter. I will deal with him." She grabbed Jace by the upper arm, a grip that was becoming familiar, and hauled him away from the group. She didn't take him to the brig, though. She dragged him down the corridor, past the checkpoints, and shoved him into an empty officer's cabin, slamming the door and locking it. She spun around, her eyes blazing. "Are you trying to get shot?" she hissed. "Do you have a death wish? Human?" Jace dropped the act instantly. His posture shifted from slouching playboy to upright operative. The fear vanished from his face, replaced by a calm, deadly seriousness. "No," he said. "I have a wish to survive, and I think you do too." Lyra paused, thrown off by the sudden change. "Who are you?" she whispered. "You are not a senator's son." "Not really." "My name is Jace Calder. I am a field agent for Terran Naval Intelligence." Lyra's hand went to the knife at her belt. She pulled it in a blur of motion, slamming Jace back against the bulkhead. She pressed the blade against his throat, the metal cold and unyielding. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't carve you open right now," she snarled. "You are a spy, an enemy combatant." "Because your boss is lying to you," Jace said, not flinching. He looked straight into her furious, shifting eyes. "Because we are not heading to a refugee station. We are heading to the Pellucid Belt. And because that encrypted channel Kale is using, it is not Sarathi, it is dual key. Half Sarathi Diplomatic Corps, half Terran Black Ops." Lyra froze. The blade didn't move, but her hand trembled slightly. "How do you know that?" "Because I have been tracking it," Jace said. "And I think you have too. I saw you in the comms room last night. You know this isn't a revolution, Lyra. It is a setup." Lyra pressed the knife harder, drawing a thin line of blood. "You know nothing about my people. You know nothing about what we are fighting for." "I know you are fighting because you are in pain," Jace said softly. "I know you look at the children on this ship and you see ghosts." Lyra let out a sharp, ragged breath. Her bioluminescence flared, violent spikes of crimson and jagged orange that painted the small cabin in the colors of a dying star. "You think you can manipulate me?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "You think you can use my guilt against me?" "I am not using it," Jace said. "I am sharing it." He reached up, moving slowly, and wrapped his hand around her wrist. He didn't try to push the knife away, and he just held her. "Why did you join them? Lyra, why are you here?" "My sister," she whispered, the words tearing out of her. "It was the water, the colony water. The Terran Mining Guild dumped the runoff. We begged them to stop. They said it was within safety limits. My sister, she was 6. She drank it. It burned her. It took 3 weeks for her to die. She was glowing from the inside. Tears welled in her eyes, silver, iridescent tears that tracked through the bioluminescent patterns on her cheeks. "I joined Kale because he promised we would make them listen," she said. "He promised we would make them stop." Jace looked at her, and his heart broke. He saw the little girl she had been, watching her sister fade. "My brother," Jace said, his voice rough. "His name was Elias. He was on New Bristol. He was a pacifist. He was there to protest the occupation. A Sarathi bomber hit the square. They said it was a military target. It was a fruit market. I found his ID badge in the rubble. That was all that was left." Lyra's eyes widened. She searched his face, looking for the lie, but found only raw, jagged grief mirroring her own. "They made us hate each other," Lyra whispered. "They killed the people we loved and handed us guns and told us to point them at the stranger across the room. And we did." Jace said, "We are doing it right now." The knife lowered slowly. The tension in the room shifted. It was no longer the tension of violence. It was something else. Something hot and desperate and terrifying. They were 2 wounded animals in a cage, realizing that the bars were made of the same lies. Lyra looked at his mouth. Jace looked at hers. The distance between them, which had been a chasm of species and war, suddenly evaporated. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. Lyra surged forward and Jace met her halfway. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling her close. Her hands gripped the lapels of his shirt, bunching the fabric. Her mouth was hot, tasting of ozone and something sweet and alien. It was a kiss born of rage and grief and a desperate, starving need for connection. It was a rejection of the history that said they should be enemies. Lyra's bioluminescence went wild, flashing brilliant, blinding white, flooding the room with light. Jace pressed her back against the door, his body hard against hers, the armor of her suit digging into his chest. But he didn't care. For a moment, there was no ship, no war, no politics, just the heat of her skin and the desperate pressure of her lips against his. They broke apart, gasping, chests heaving. They stared at each other, eyes wide, shocked by the intensity of what had just happened. Lyra touched her lips, her fingers trembling. This is dangerous. I know. Jace breathed. If Kale finds out, he will kill us both. Lyra closed her eyes for a second, centering herself. When she opened them, the amber had returned, clear and sharp. I will not let them do it again, she said fiercely. I will not let them kill more sisters, more brothers. Then help me, Jace said. Help me stop this ship. Lyra nodded once, a pact sealed in blood and breath. I can get us into the engineering sublevels, she said. But I need your slicer tech to bypass the physical locks. If we can get to the secondary FTL interface, we can see the real command scripts. One condition, Lyra added, gripping his arm. We divert the ship, but not to a Terran base. We send it somewhere neutral, somewhere safe. I will not trade one prison for another. Agreed, Jace said. Somewhere safe. The journey to the engineering deck was an exercise in claustrophobia and high-stakes comedy. To avoid the patrols, they had to use the maintenance crawl spaces, narrow metal tubes filled with conduits and optic cables that were never designed for human or Sarathi passage. Jace was crawling ahead, grunting as he dragged his body over a bundle of ribbed piping. Whose idea was it to build these vents this small? He muttered, his voice echoing. It is like they designed the ship for ferrets. Sarathi maintenance drones are small, Lyra whispered from behind him. And perhaps humans are just unnecessarily bulky. You have too many bones. I have the standard number of bones. Thank you very much, Jace retorted, wincing as his elbow banged against a junction box. And right now, every single one of them hurts. Stop complaining, Lyra said. You sound like a pampered dignitary. I am a pampered dignitary. That is my cover. I am supposed to be sipping brandy, not army crawling through a ventilation shaft smelling like hydraulic fluid. Shh, Lyra hissed. Patrol. They froze. Through the grate beneath them, they could see two Sarathi guards walking down the corridor, their heavy boots clanking on the metal. They were speaking in rapid-fire Sarathi. Doesn't feel right. The course. Why are we running silent? Just follow orders. Kyle knows what he is doing. The guards passed. Jace let out a breath he had been holding. Even the grunts are getting nervous. He whispered. Good, Lyra said. Nervous men make mistakes. Keep moving. They reached the access hatch to the FTL Core's secondary control room. It was located in a blind spot behind the main reactor shielding, a place Kale likely hadn't bothered to secure because the radiation levels nearby were high enough to make your hair fall out if you stayed too long. Lyra scanned the locking mechanism. It is bio-coded, Sarathi DNA only. She placed her hand on the panel. The sensors read her thermal signature and the specific bioluminescent frequency of her skin. The light turned green. The hatch hissed open. Ladies first, Jace said, gesturing. After you, porcelain, Lyra replied, a smirk playing on her lips. They slipped inside. The room was small, lit only by the blinking lights of the server banks. Jace immediately plugged his data pad into the main terminal. His fingers flew across the holographic keyboard. I am bypassing the bridge lockout, he muttered, accessing the navigation logs. Okay, here we go. A 3D map of the sector sprang to life above the console. The Aurora crown was a blue dot moving along a red line. The red line ended at a large, swirling structure in the Pellucid belt. That is not a refugee station, Lyra said, her voice cold. That is Outpost 4. What is Outpost 4? It is a civilian transit hub, Lyra said, horror dawning on her face. It is a major transfer point for Sarathi families moving between the core worlds. There are thousands of people on that station at any given time. Jace tapped a command. I am pulling up the approach vector. The simulation showed the Aurora Crown exiting hyperspace directly on top of the station. Look at the FTL core status, Jace said, pointing to a pulsing warning light. The safety interlocks have been disabled remotely. The core is set to overload 10 seconds after we drop out of warp. Lyra stared at the screen. They are not going to dock. They are going to ram it. It is a bomb, Jace said, his face pale. A massive warp-speed bomb. The explosion will take out the station and the ship. No survivors. Just a massive debris field. And the blame? Lyra asked. Jace pulled up the encrypted comms logs again. He found a hidden file ready to be transmitted the moment the ship exploded. It is a pre-recorded message, he said. From Kale. Claiming responsibility for the attack in the name of the Sarathi Liberation Front. And here, Lyra said, pointing to another file, a Terran military log. It says the Aurora Crown was responding to a distress call when it was ambushed by Sarathi extremists. It is a perfect narrative, Jace said, disgust curling his lip. The Sarathi look like monsters who killed their own people to destroy a peace ship. The humans look like tragic victims. The Federation gets its war. The Sarathi hardliners get their rallying cry. And we are the kindling, Lyra whispered. She turned away from the console, pacing the small room. She was shaking. The rage was radiating off her in waves of heat. I am going to kill him, she said. I am going to walk onto the bridge and put a hole in Kale's head. No, Jace said, grabbing her shoulders. If you kill him, his loyalists detonate the core manually. We need to disable the remote override first. Then we expose him. How? Lyra asked. The override is hard-coded. We need to rewrite the script, Jace said. We need to tell the ship that the war is over before it even begins. He turned back to the console. I can splice the feed. When Kale tries to broadcast his manifesto, we can swap it. We can broadcast the truth, the logs, the orders from Earth and Xylos. Lyra looked at the map again. The blue dot was inching closer to the red line. We do not have much time, she said. Then we better get moving, Jace said. He looked at her. Her face was set in a grim, determined mask, but her eyes were wet. Hey, he said softly. Lyra looked up. We are going to stop this. I know, she said. She looked down at his hand, which was still resting on her shoulder. Slowly, deliberately. She reached up and covered his hand with hers. Her skin was warm, vibrant, alive. I am not a mask, Jace, she whispered. I refuse to be a pretty mask on a slaughterhouse. I know, Jace said again. You are not a mask. You are the fire that burns it down. For the first time since they met, she didn't pull away. She squeezed his hand, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had formed in the dark. Let's go, she said. They turned back to the hatch, leaving the map glowing behind them, a picture of a future they were about to rewrite. The alliance was no longer a matter of survival. It was a matter of war. But this time, the war was not between Earth and the Confederacy. It was Lyra and Jace against the lie that had trapped them both. They moved through the service tunnels with a new, synchronized urgency. The friction of their initial meeting had been replaced by the seamless, terrifying efficiency of two professionals who had finally found a partner capable of keeping up. We cannot do this alone, Lyra said, her voice low as they paused near a junction box to check the patrol schedules on Jace's datapad. Kale has 40 loyalists. Even with your skills and my anger, the math is against us. We change the math, Jace replied, wiping a smudge of grease from his cheek. We subtract Kale's support and add a chaotic variable he is not expecting. You mean the hostages, Lyra said. I mean the elite passengers, Jace corrected with a grin. You would be amazed what a desperate billionaire can do with a heavy object and a lack of self-preservation. Lyra's part of the mission required surgical precision. She could not walk into the mess hall and announce a mutiny. She would be shot before she finished the sentence. She had to find the cracks in the armor. She found Bax and Rin in the lower armory, conducting a routine inventory of the plasma cells. They were younger than Kale, raised on the same bitter stories of oppression, but they were soldiers, not martyrs. There was a difference. Lyra, Bax said, looking up as she entered. He looked tired. His scales were dull, a sign of chronic stress. Kale is asking for you. He says you are spending too much time patrolling the lower decks. Kale says a lot of things, Lyra said, closing the blast door behind her and locking it. Her tone made Rin's hand drift toward her sidearm. Easy, Lyra said, holding up her hands. I am not here to fight. I am here to show you something. She pulled the datapad from her belt and slid it across the metal table. It displayed the decrypted messages Jace had pulled from the ether, the cold, bureaucratic exchange between the Terran Defense Minister and the Sarathi High Counselor. Read the highlighted section, Lyra commanded. Rin frowned, leaning over the screen. Her eyes scanned the text, widening as the bioluminescence on her neck flashed a confused yellow. Asset Kale. Expendable. Ensure no survivors to maximize political impact. This is fake, Bax said, pushing the pad away. A human trick, is it? Lyra asked softly. Think about the course. Bax. Why are we heading to the Pellucid Belt? Why are we jamming our own distress signal? Why did Kale order us to rig the FTL core for overload instead of preparing for a docking procedure? Bax went silent. He looked at Rin. The doubt that had been festering in the back of their minds suddenly had a shape. We are not soldiers to them, Lyra said, stepping closer. We are ammunition. Kale knows, or he refuses to see it. Either way. He is flying us into a grave so that some fat politician on Xylos can get an applause on the evening news. What do you want us to do? Rin asked, her voice trembling. If we go against Caleb, we die fighting for our lives. Not for a lie, Lyra said. When the signal comes, I do not need you to shoot your brothers. I need you to hesitate. I need you to look the other way. Can you do that? Bax looked at the datapad, then at Lyra. He nodded slowly. We are with you, Lyra. But if this goes wrong, it is already wrong, she said. We are just trying to make it right. While Lyra sowed discord, Jace was cultivating chaos. He had gathered his inner circle, Admiral Vance, Marcus, Dr. Eris, Elena, and Lenny, in the corner of the main lounge. The guards were used to them huddled together now. They dismissed it as the wealthy seeking comfort in their herd. Lenny, Jace whispered. How is your memory? I remember every heckler I have ever had, Lenny said, wiping sweat from his forehead. Why? I need you to memorize a sequence of jokes, Jace said. Lenny blinked. You want me to do a set? Now? It is a code, Jace explained. I have rigged the internal address system to listen for specific keywords. If you say the punchline to the Merchant from Mars joke, it triggers the fire suppression system in Sector 4. If you tell the one about the politician and the duck, it cuts the lights in the armory. Lenny stared at him. You turned my act into a weaponized algorithm? It is the only unencrypted channel we have, Jace said. You are the conductor, Lenny. When the shooting starts, you direct the chaos. I always knew my material was killer, Lenny muttered, a nervous smile twitching on his lips. And us? Elena asked. She was currently polishing a heavy silver serving spoon against the leg of her chair until the handle was a jagged spike. You and the Admiral are the muscle, Jace said. Admiral Vance cracked her knuckles. I have been wanting to hit that guard by the door since Tuesday. He has poor posture. We need weapons, Marcus noted. We have cutlery and anger. They have plasma rifles. Jace reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metallic sphere. It was a grav pulse grenade, standard issue for covert ops, disguised as a luxury paperweight. I have 2 of these, Jace said. It is not much, but it is enough to start a riot. The planning was done. The pieces were moving. But before the final descent into violence, the universe granted them a singular moment of stillness. Jace found Lyra in the auxiliary observation dome on the upper deck. It was a small, secluded bubble of glass intended for private stargazing, currently locked down and ignored by the hijackers. Jace had bypassed the lock with a hairpin and a prayer. Lyra was standing by the glass, looking out. The ship was passing through a dense star cluster. The view was overwhelming. 1 billion burning suns suspended in the velvet dark, painting the room in shifting washes of gold and violent blue. She didn't turn when he entered. She knew his tread. It is beautiful, she said quietly, and indifferent. The stars do not care who runs this ship. They do not care if we burn. That is why I like them, Jace said, stepping up beside her. They are honest. He looked at her profile. The starlight caught the ridges of her cheekbones and the bioluminescent markings that traced the line of her throat. She looked ethereal, a creature made of light and shadow, but her hands were gripping the railing so hard her knuckles were white. Are you afraid? Jace asked, terrified. Lyra admitted, not of dying. I have made peace with that. I am afraid that none of this matters, that we are just fighting gravity. Jace turned her to face him. He reached out, his fingers brushing the hair back from her temple. His touch was gentle, a stark contrast to the violence that awaited them. It matters, he said. It matters because we decided it does. That is the only power we have. Lyra looked up at him. Her eyes shifted to a deep, vulnerable violet. You confuse me. Human, she whispered. Jace? Yes? Jace. My name is Jace. Jace. She tested the word on her tongue. You are everything I was taught to hate. You are arrogant and soft, and you talk too much. But when you look at me, I do not feel like a weapon. I feel seen, Jace finished. She nodded, dangerously human. Jace let out a shaky breath. God, you are terrifying, I know. No. I mean, I have spent my whole life training to fight people like you. I know exactly how to kill you. I know where your armor is weak. I know your reaction times. He stepped closer, closing the gap until their bodies were touching. But right now, the only thing I can think about is how much I want you, and it scares the hell out of me. Lyra's breath hitched. She reached up, her cool alien fingers tracing the line of his jaw, feeling the roughness of his stubble. Then be scared, she whispered, and do it anyway. The kiss that followed was not like the one in the cabin. That had been an explosion. This was a surrender. Jace's arms went around her waist, pulling her flush against him. Lyra wrapped her legs around his, the height difference vanishing as he lifted her up, pressing her against the cool glass of the dome. The universe outside spun in slow motion, Inside, the gravity seemed to shift, centering entirely on where their skin touched. They moved to the floor of the observation deck, a tangle of limbs and shadows. There was a desperate, feverish quality to their intimacy. They were two soldiers on the eve of battle, trying to memorize each other in case there was no tomorrow. Lyra's bioluminescence flared in waves, responding to his touch. When his hand grazed her spine, the markings glowed a soft, ecstatic gold. When he kissed the hollow of her throat, they pulsed with a deep, rhythmic blue. Jace was lost in her. He traced the scars on her shoulder, remnants of a childhood in a war zone, and kissed them as if he could heal the history that made them. Lyra ran her hands over his chest, feeling the heavy beat of his human heart, marveling at how fragile and fierce it felt against her palm. There were whispered confessions in the dark. "I never wanted to be a soldier," Lyra murmured against his skin. "I wanted to be an architect. I wanted to build things that stayed standing. I wanted to be a teacher," Jace whispered back, his fingers tangled in her hair. "History. So I could explain why we keep making the same mistakes. Maybe we can still build something," she said. "Maybe," he agreed. "But first, we have to survive." The night passed in a blur of sensation and silence. They slept for an hour, entangled in each other's arms, Jace's head resting on Lyra's chest, lulled by the hum of the ship and the warmth of her glow. When they woke, the starlight had shifted. The aurora crown was nearing the Pellucid belt. Lyra sat up, stretching. Her hair was a chaotic mess, and her skin was humming with a faint residual light. Jace watched her, propped up on one elbow, a lopsided grin on his face. "What?" she asked, catching his look. "Your hair," he said. "It is a disaster. It is adorable." Lyra scowled playfully, running a hand through the tangles. "I am a revolutionary leader. I am not adorable. I am fearsome." "You are fearsome," Jace agreed, reaching out to trace a glowing spiral on her arm. "And glowing. It is very practical. I will never lose you in the dark." Lyra caught his hand and kissed the knuckles. "Do not lose me, Jace. Not today." "I won't," he promised. They dressed in silence, the playful mood evaporating as the weight of the mission settled back onto their shoulders. They checked their weapons. They adjusted their armor. The lovers vanished, the warriors returned. But the connection remained, a steel thread binding them together. "Ready?" Jace asked, standing by the door. Lyra holstered her plasma pistol. She looked at him, and her eyes were clear amber. "Let's go break a ship." The plan began with a joke. In the main lounge, the tension was palpable. The guards were pacing. The hostages were silent. Suddenly, Lenny stood up. "Hey!" he shouted, waving his arms. "I just remembered something." The nearest guard spun around, leveling his rifle. "Sit down. Human! No, seriously!" Lenny yelled, his voice cracking with genuine fear masked as performance. "A merchant from Mars walks into a bar, right? And the bartender says, 'Why the long face?' And the merchant says, 'Because my atmosphere decompressor just blew a gasket in Sector 4. The guard stared at him, confused. Silence. But as Lenny delivered the punchline, Jace, hidden in the ventilation shaft above the atrium, hit the enter key on his data pad. Far below, in the environmental control hub, the fire suppression system interpreted the audio cue. High-pressure foam cannons in the hallway outside the main lounge exploded into life, simultaneously. Jace triggered the second phase. He routed a power surge through the artificial gravity grid in the aft section. The ship lurched. The floor beneath the guard's feet tilted 45 degrees to the port side. "Now!" Admiral Vance roared. The resistance moved. It was chaos. but it was beautiful. Elena, the socialite, lunged forward with the grace of a dancer. She drove her sharpened silver spoon into the exposed neck joint of the nearest guard's exosuit, severing the hydraulic line. The suit seized up, trapping the guard inside. Marcus, the logistics magnate, threw his weight against a second guard, tackling him with the momentum of a runaway freight train. And Lenny, screaming a high-pitched battle cry, grabbed a magnum of vintage champagne from a display table and swung it with both hands. The heavy glass bottle connected with a terrorist's helmet with a resounding crack, shattering and drenching the stunned alien in expensive, sparkling wine. "That is for the bad service," Lenny shrieked. "Vintage rebellion, baby." The guards, disoriented by the gravity shift and the sudden aggression of the sheep, faltered. In the confusion, Lyra and Jace dropped from the ceiling vents like avenging angels. They moved as one. Lyra went low, sweeping the legs of a heavy trooper, while Jace went high, firing stun pulses from his pistol into the sensors of two others. They fought back to back, a rotating cylinder of violence. When Lyra reloaded, Jace covered her sector. When Jace was forced to duck under a plasma volley, Lyra returned fire with lethal accuracy. "Clear right," Jace yelled, spinning to drop a target. "Clear left," Lyra responded, using the momentum of her spin to kick a rifle out of a guard's hands. Bax and Rin. The Sarathi Lyra had turned, stood by the blast doors. When their commander screamed at them to open fire on the hostages, they hesitated. They looked at Lyra, fighting beside the human, and they lowered their weapons. "We have a containment breach," Bax yelled into his comms, lying through his teeth. "We cannot get a clear shot." The resistance seized the lounge in under 3 minutes. Jace grabbed Admiral Vance. "Secure the doors. Do not let anyone in or out. We are going for the bridge." "Give 'em hell, kid," Vance said, holding a captured plasma rifle like she had been born with it. Jace and Lyra ran toward the forward deck. The ship was waking up to the threat now. Alarms were blaring, a deafening cacophony of sirens. "Kale is in weapons control," Lyra shouted over the noise. "It is just below the bridge. He will try to manually trigger the sequence from there." They reached the heavy blast doors of weapons control. Lyra didn't bother with the keypad. She slapped a shaped charge of mining explosive onto the lock. "Cover your ears." The explosion blew the door inward. Smoke billowed out. Lyra and Jace charged in through the haze. The room was filled with tactical displays. In the center, standing over the master console, was Kale. He was surrounded by 4 of his elite Praetorian guards. He looked up, his synthetic eye whirring. He didn't look surprised. He looked resigned. "I expected the human," Kyle said, his voice grinding like stone. "But you, Lyra? I thought you had more pride." "I have enough pride to refuse to be a puppet," Lyra said, stepping forward. Her weapon was raised, aimed at his chest. She threw the datapad onto the floor between them. "It is over, Kyle. We know. The deal with the Federation, the false flag. You are not a martyr. You are a cleaner. You are doing their dirty work." Kale looked at the datapad, but he didn't pick it up. He sneered. "You think I do not know?" Lyra froze. You knew?" "Of course I knew," Kale roared. "Do you think revolutions are funded by dreams? They are funded by blood and compromise. Yes, the humans want a war. Yes, the Council wants a war, and I will give it to them. Because in the chaos of war, we can rise, we can burn the corruption out." He was mad, not legally insane, but ideologically consumed. He had stared into the abyss of his people's suffering for so long that he had decided the only way out was to blow up the entire world. "If we die here," Kale said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "we become legends. Our names will rally the fleets. The Aurora Crown will be the spark that ignites the galaxy. Not if we tell them the truth, Jace said, stepping up beside Lyra. We are broadcasting the logs. Kale, the universe will know you were bought and paid for. Kale's face twisted in fury. Kill them. The Praetorians opened fire. Jace and Lyra dove for cover behind the server banks. Plasma bolts chewed up the metal around them. Jace, I need to get to the console, Lyra yelled. The override code is in my head, but I need physical access. I will draw their fire. Jace shouted back. On 3, 1, 2, 3. Jace popped up, firing blindly to suppress the guards. Lyra sprinted across the open ground, sliding under a hail of fire to reach the central dais. She kicked Kale in the knee, shattering the joint, and slammed his head into the console. He crumpled. Lyra's fingers flew across the keys. She entered the dual-key code Jace had decrypted. Override accepted. FTL target lock disengaged. She let out a breath. It is done. The course is... Suddenly. Kale laughed. He was on the floor, bleeding, but he was laughing. You think I trusted the computer? He wheezed. He reached into his vest and pulled out a crude, heavy device, a dead man's switch. He pressed the button. The ship shuddered violently. A sound like a dying god screamed from the engineering deck, a rising, hysterical whine. Warning, the ship's AI announced, its voice calm and terrifying. Manual FTL core destabilization initiated. Core overload in 5 minutes. What did you do? Lyra screamed. I gave us our ending. Kale spat. Lyra looked at the screen. The software override was useless. The core was physically building toward a critical mass detonation. Jace scrambled over to her. We have to go to the core. We have to dump the energy manually. Kale grabbed Lyra's ankle. You will burn with me. Lyra looked down at him, at the leader she had once idolized. No. Kale, she said sadly. You will burn alone. She kicked him away. Jace grabbed her hand. Run! They sprinted for the door, but the ship was dying around them. Explosions rocked the corridor. A support beam collapsed, sealing the exit behind them. They were forced down a side passage. The blast doors to the engineering sector were closing. The automatic containment protocols were sealing off the dangerous zones. Jace! Lyra yelled. She slid under the closing door. Jace dove after her, but a piece of debris clipped his leg. He stumbled. The door slammed shut. Jace! Lyra pounded on the thick metal. Jace was on the other side. I am okay. Jace's voice came through the comms, breathless. I am okay, but I am cut off. I have to take the service route. Lyra looked at the warning light above the door. Radiation hazard. Lethal levels. Meet me at the core chamber, she yelled. Do not die on me. Calder. I have a date with a glowing revolutionary. Jace's voice crackled back, filled with forced bravado. I would not miss it for the world. The countdown clock on the wall ticked down. 04:59. 04:58. Lyra turned and ran toward the heart of the ship, toward the light that was threatening to consume them all. The laws of physics were beginning to negotiate their surrender. Deep in the bowels of the Aurora Crown, the FTL core was no longer a machine. It was a screaming wound in the fabric of the universe. The countdown clock on the bulkheads flashed a relentless red, marking the minutes until the containment field collapsed, but time itself seemed to have lost its rhythm. Jace Calder sprinted down the tertiary maintenance corridor on Deck 12, his lungs burning with the acrid taste of ozone and recycled terror. The hallway stretched before him, but it was wrong. The metal walls were breathing, expanding and contracting with a slow, biological pulse. Every time his boot hit the floor grate, the sound of the impact echoed a full second before his foot actually made contact. He turned a corner and skidded to a halt, The air in front of him shimmered like heat haze over a desert road. A wrench, dropped by some fleeing technician, was floating in midair, rotating slowly. As it spun, it left a trail of ghostly afterimages, a fan of steel that refused to fade. Space folding, Jace muttered, clutching his stomach as a wave of vertigo hit him. I hate space folding. It is like a hangover that rewrites your DNA. He tapped his comms earbud. Admiral, talk to me. I am seeing things down here that would make a surrealist painter vomit. Admiral Vance's voice crackled through the static, sounding tinny and distant, as if she were speaking from inside a deep well. We are holding the lounge, Calder, but the gravity in here is fluctuating. 1 minute I am sitting in a chair, the next I am floating near the chandelier. This is not how I envisioned my retirement. I was promised shuffleboard, not quantum instability. Hold the line, Jace said, pushing past the floating wrench. I am heading for the main data trunk in the server farm. I need to override the broadcast before Kale controls the narrative. Hurry up. Son, Vance grunted. The Sarathi guards outside the blast doors are getting twitchy, and Lenny is running out of jokes. Jace broke into a run again, ignoring the way his own shadow seemed to detach from his feet and run 3 paces ahead of him. The ship was dying. The core was building toward a critical mass that would not just vaporize the Aurora crown, but punch a hole in reality the size of a small moon. On the bridge, the atmosphere was suffocating. Lyra knelt on the central dais, her hands bound behind her back with magnetic cuffs. She had been intercepted 3 corridors away from the core, tackled by a squad of Kale's elite Praetorians who had been waiting for her. Her tactical suit was scorched, and a bruise was darkening the violet skin of her cheekbone, but her head was high. Kale stood above her, silhouetted against the main viewport. Outside, the stars were beginning to streak and blur, not from speed, but from the gravitational lensing of the overloading core. The bridge crew, a mix of terrified human officers and grim-faced Sarathi militants, watched in silence. A camera drone hovered in the air, its red eye fixed on Lyra. We are live in 30 seconds, Kale said. His voice was calm, terrifyingly so. He adjusted the cuffs of his uniform. He looked every inch the tragic hero he believed himself to be. You cannot hide the truth forever, Kale, Lyra said, her voice rough. The core is unstable. You are going to kill everyone, so... That is the point, Kale whispered, leaning down so only she could hear. We are the message. He straightened up as the recording light on the drone turned a solid, unblinking green. Citizens of the Confederacy. Brothers and sisters of the struggle, Kale began, his voice booming through the ship's internal address system and beaming out toward the waiting listening posts in the Pellucid belt. He gestured to Lyra, casting her as a broken, treacherous figure at his feet. I stand before you on the bridge of the Aurora Crown, a vessel that was promised as a symbol of peace. But there is no peace with the Federation. There is only corruption. Even our own have been poisoned by it. He paced around Lyra, playing to the camera. This woman was my lieutenant, my sister in arms, but the humans turned her. They offered her gold. They offered her safety. And in exchange, she tried to sabotage our mission. She represents the weakness that has kept our people in chains. She was willing to trade our freedom for a seat at their table. Lyra glared at the camera, her bioluminescence flashing a defiant, angry crimson. She did not speak. She waited. Jace, she thought, projecting the name like a prayer. Now would be a good time to be brilliant. 2 decks down, Jace slid into the server room. It was a forest of cooling towers and blinking lights. The air here was freezing, super cooled to keep the processors from melting. He found the primary node for the passenger entertainment network. It was the system responsible for streaming movies, news, and safety announcements to every screen on the ship. He jacked his data pad into the port. "Okay," he muttered, his fingers flying across the holographic interface. "You want a broadcast? Kale? Let's give them the director's cut." He bypassed the firewall. It was designed to stop teenagers from stealing movies, not to stop a naval intelligence operative and access the main feed. He queued up the files he and Lyra had recovered from the engineering logs, the audio recordings, the emails, the secret agreements. "Upload complete," Jace said, hovering his finger over the enter key. "Smile for the camera, you son of a bitch." He hit the key. On the bridge, Kale was reaching the crescendo of his speech. "We will not submit. We will burn this ship as a beacon of defiance. We will—" Suddenly, the large tactical screens lining the walls of the bridge flickered. Kale's face vanished, replaced by a static-filled audio waveform. A voice, cold and unmistakably human, filled the room. It was the Terran Defense Minister. "The target is the Pellucid Belt. We need the destruction of the Aurora Crown to be total. No survivors." Kyle froze. The bridge went deathly silent. Then, a second voice, a Sarathi High Counselor, responded. "Agreed. Kale is a useful asset, but he is expendable. The ship will make an exquisite martyr. Ensure the blame falls entirely on the radical faction." The audio looped. "The ship will make an exquisite martyr." Every screen on the ship, from the massive displays on the bridge to the personal tablets in the hostage lounge, was playing the recording. Kale stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing. The narrative he had built, the holy war he was ready to die for, was crumbling in real time. The Praetorian guards lowered their weapons, looking from Kale to the screen and back again. The doubt that Lyra had planted in the lower decks had blossomed into full-blown realization. Lyra laughed. It was a sharp, bitter sound. "You wanted a message." "Kale," she said, climbing to her feet. Her hands were still bound, but she stood tall. "There it is." Kyle spun around, his face twisting into a mask of pure, incoherent rage. "Turn it off. Cut the feed." But the feed continued. Now, documents were scrolling across the screens, flight plans, bank transfers, death warrants signed by both governments. In the main lounge, the effect was electric. The terrorists guarding the hostages lowered their rifles. The human passengers sat up, realizing that the game had changed. Lenny, the comedian, stood up from behind a barricade of overturned tables. He looked at the confused guard nearest to him. "Well," Lenny deadpanned, his voice cutting through the tension. "It looks like the elite hostages were not supposed to react. I guess we missed the memo about being sheep." The guard looked at Lenny, then at his weapon. He threw the rifle onto the floor with a clatter. "I did not sign up for this," the guard muttered. "I did not sign up to be a martyr for a payout." On the bridge, the situation exploded. Kale drew his sidearm, a heavy kinetic hand cannon. He aimed it not at the screen, but at Lyra. "You did this!" he screamed. "You poisoned them!" Lyra looked him in the eye. She did not flinch. "I woke them up," she said. Kale fired, but the shot went wide. At the last millisecond, the blast doors to the bridge hissed open and a figure blurred into the room. Jace Calder did not enter the room. He arrived like a kinetic event. He dove, tackling Lyra around the waist and knocking her out of the path of the bullet, which ricocheted harmlessly off a console. They hit the floor together, rolling behind the captain's chair. "Jace," Lyra gasped. "You are late. Traffic was murder," Jace quipped, breathless. "Also, the hallway tried to eat me. Hold still." He pulled a laser cutter from his belt and sliced through her magnetic cuffs. The metal parted with a spark. Lyra rubbed her wrists, her eyes shifting to a deadly focused amber. "Give me a weapon," she ordered. Jace handed her his spare pulse pistol. Lyra stood up and vaulted over the chair. "Kyle," she roared. Kyle was already moving. He had abandoned his gun and drawn a serrated combat blade. He charged, a juggernaut of muscle and cybernetic rage. Lyra met him in the center of the bridge. The fight was a blur of motion. Kale was stronger, his blows heavy enough to crack bone. But Lyra was fluid, water flowing around a stone. She ducked under a savage slash, spinning to drive her elbow into his ribs. He grunted but didn't slow down. He backhanded her, sending her skidding across the deck plates. Lyra tasted blood. She wiped her mouth and grinned. "Is that all you have?" she taunted. Kale roared and lunged again, but this time it was 2 against 1. Jace slid across the floor, kicking Kale's knee out from under him. As Kale stumbled, Lyra used Jace's shoulder as a springboard, launching herself into the air. She came down with both boots squarely on Kale's chest, driving him onto his back. They moved with a terrifying synchronization. Jace pinned Kale's sword arm to the floor while Lyra knelt on his chest, her pistol pressed against his forehead. The bridge fell silent. The Praetorians did not intervene. They watched, waiting to see who would be the alpha. "Do it," Kale spat, blood bubbling on his lips. "Finish it. Prove you are just like them." Lyra's finger tightened on the trigger. Her bioluminescence was a blinding, angry white. Every instinct in her body screamed for revenge, for her sister, for the lies, for the fear. "Lyra," Jace said softly. He didn't grab her gun. He didn't force her hand. He just placed his palm gently on her forearm. "Look at him," Jace said. "He wants you to do it. He wants to be the victim." Lyra looked down. She saw the madness in Kale's eyes. He was begging for death because death was easier than facing the truth of his failure. "If you kill him," Jace said, "you continue the cycle. Blood for blood. It never ends. We have to be better than that. We have to be the ones who stop." Lyra's breath came in ragged gasps. She looked at Jace. She saw the trust in his eyes. He was betting his life that she was more than a killer. Slowly, agonizingly, Lyra lowered the gun. "No," she whispered. She stood up, leaving Kale gasping on the floor. "I will not give you the satisfaction, Kale," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "You will live. You will stand trial, and you will watch as we build a peace you tried to burn." She turned to the Praetorians. "Secure him," she commanded. The guards hesitated for a fraction of a second, then rushed forward, hauling Kale to his feet and stripping him of his weapons. Jace stood up, exhaling a long breath. "Remind me never to make you angry," he said. Lyra looked at him, the adrenaline fading into exhaustion. "You are safe, mostly." Warning. The ship's AI interrupted, its voice devoid of emotion. Core overload imminent. 4 minutes to critical failure. Manual containment breach detected. The victory evaporated instantly. "The override," Lyra shouted. "Jace, get to the nav console." Jace scrambled to the station. He punched in the codes Lyra shouted at him. "Command accepted," Jace said, relief flooding his voice. "Wait. No." The screen flashed a red error message. "Remote access denied. Hardware lock engaged." "It is not working," Jace yelled. Kale physically fused the circuit. Lyra grabbed Kale by his collar. "What did you do?" Kale laughed, a wet gurgling sound. "I told you, there is no going back. The remote link is dead. The only way to stop the countdown is the manual failsafe." "Where is it?" Lyra demanded. "Inside the core chamber." Kale sneered. "In the radiation zone. where reality is already unmaking itself. Go ahead. Lyra, go and save your human pets. You will never walk out. Lyra shoved him back into the arms of the guards. She turned to Jace. We have to go. Jace shook his head. No, we do not have to go. I have to go. What? Lyra stepped back. It is a one-way trip. Lyra, Jace said, his voice steady. The radiation levels in the chamber are lethal. Sarathi physiology is more susceptible to ionizing radiation than human. You would be dead before you reached the console. I am not letting you go alone, Lyra shouted. You have to, Jace argued. Someone has to testify. Someone has to tell the galaxy what happened here. You are the symbol. Lyra, you are the proof. If we both die, the truth dies with us. I do not care about the symbol, Lyra screamed, grabbing his lapels. I care about you. The confession hung in the air, raw and undeniable. Jace froze. He looked at her, his eyes softening. I know, he whispered. That is why I have to do this, because you deserve a life where you do not have to fight anymore. He tried to pull away, but Lyra held on. Her grip was iron. You taught me that I am more than a weapon, she said, tears welling in her amber eyes. Do not ask me to be a widow before I have even had a chance to be a partner. Lyra. We go together, she said fiercely. We share the load. Maybe the kinetic dampening field in my suit can shield you. Maybe your human luck can shield me. I do not know, but I am not staying behind. Jace looked at her. He saw the stubborn set of her jaw. He knew that look. She would fight him harder than she fought Kale if he tried to leave her. He let out a defeated, terrified laugh. You are impossible, he said. I am Sarathi, she corrected. We are stubborn. Jace took her hand. He interlaced his fingers with hers. Okay, he said. Together. They turned and ran from the bridge, leaving the chaos behind them. The engineering deck was a nightmare. As they approached the heavy blast doors of the core chamber, the reality warping became violent. The air screamed. Colors that didn't exist in the visible spectrum danced around them. The countdown clock above the door read 02 hours. Jace punched the emergency release. The massive doors groaned and slid open. A wave of heat and light washed over them. The core chamber was a cathedral of technology, vast and vaulted. In the center, the FTL drive was a spinning sphere of pure, blinding energy. Arcs of lightning lashed out, striking the walls. The manual failsafe was a small pedestal at the very base of the drive, 50 meters away across a catwalk that was trembling like a living thing. Jace looked at Lyra. Her skin was already reacting to the radiation, glowing a frantic, pulsating white. Are you ready? He asked, shouting over the roar of the drive. Lyra looked at the core, then at him. She squeezed his hand so hard it hurt. No, she said. Me neither, Jace said. He stepped forward, pulling her with him. Let's go change history. They stepped into the light, hands clasped tight, walking directly into the heart of the storm. The threshold of the core chamber was not a door. It was a tear in the fabric of the possible. Inside, the universe was having a seizure. The FTL drive, a massive sphere of spinning tungsten and containment fields, was no longer obeying the laws of thermodynamics. It pulsed with a light that was not quite white and not quite violet. A color that hurt the eyes because the human retina had not evolved to process it. Jace Calder stepped onto the gantry and immediately grabbed the railing as the floor seemed to drop 3 meters, only to snap back into place a millisecond later. Watch your step, he shouted, though his voice sounded thin and metallic, echoing back at him before he had finished speaking. The acoustics were lagging behind reality. Lyra gripped his arm, her knuckles white. Her tactical suit was chiming with radiation warnings, a frantic rising tone that was almost drowned out by the scream of the drive. "It is beautiful," Lyra whispered, her eyes wide and reflecting the chaotic storm, in a terrible way. The walkway ahead was a gauntlet of distortion, arcs of rogue energy, thick as tree trunks, whipped out from the core, striking the shielding walls with the sound of cracking thunder. Where the lightning hit, the metal didn't just melt, it aged. Rust bloomed in seconds, turning steel to dust, before reversing and polishing itself back to a shine. Time itself was stuttering. "We have to move between the pulses," Jace yelled, timing the rhythm of the arcs. On my mark, they ran. It was a nightmare of physics. At one point, Jace saw a reflection of himself in a polished panel, but the reflection was running the other way, fleeing the room. At another, Lyra stumbled, and for a heart-stopping second she seemed to fracture into three distinct versions of herself, one falling, one freezing, and one sprinting, before the probabilities collapsed back into a single, terrified woman. They ducked under a lashing tongue of plasma that smelled of ozone and burnt sugar. The heat was oppressive, a physical weight pressing against their chest plates. The manual failsafe was located at the base of the drive, a solitary control column bathed in the most intense radiation. It was the eye of the storm. They reached the final platform, gasping for air that tasted like copper. The console was 10 feet away, but the air between them and the interface was shimmering with lethal ionization. Jace looked at the readout on his wrist. His exposure meter was already in the red. "Stay here," he ordered, pushing Lyra behind a shielded bulkhead. "What are you doing?" Lyra demanded, grabbing his belt. "The field is too strong," Jace shouted, looking back at her. His face was pale, sweat streaming down his temples. "If we both go in, we both cook. I can rig the bypass. I just need 30 seconds. No! Lyra screamed. Jace tried to pull away. Lyra, be reasonable. I am the operative. This is the job. You are the future. You survive, you testify, you change things. I am just the guy who opens the door. You are not just the guy, Lyra yelled, and with a surge of strength amplified by her exosuit, she slammed him back against the wall. She stood chest to chest with him, her eyes blazing with a ferocity that outshone the core. You do not get to be the martyr, Jace called her. I am done with martyrs. I am done with death being the only way we prove we matter. She grabbed his face in her hands, ignoring the radiation alarm screaming in her helmet. We do this together, or we do not do it at all. Jace looked at her. He saw the stubborn set of her jaw, the terrifying love in her eyes. He realized, with a jolt of clarity, that she would fight him harder than she would fight the radiation. Fine, he breathed, surrendering to her logic. Together. But we cannot just walk in. We will burn before we touch the keys. Lyra looked at the console, then at her own suit. My suit has a kinetic dampener powered by a micro-fusion cell, she said quickly. Yours has a jagged-edge military shield generator. If we link them, Jace realized, his mind racing. If we daisy-chain the power supplies and modulate the frequency, we can create a bubble, Lyra finished. A moving dead zone. It will not stop the radiation, but it might buy us enough time to not die immediately. Jace pulled a coupling cable from his belt. Plug into my port. They worked with frantic, fumbling hands, connecting the power systems of their suits. The moment the connection clicked, a hum of energy surrounded them, a shimmering, localized field that pushed back the worst of the distortion. On 3, Jace said, 1, 2, 3. They stepped out from behind the bulkhead, moving as a single entity, linked by the cable and by their clasped hands. The noise was deafening. The light was blinding. They forced their way toward the console, fighting against a magnetic wind that tried to push them back, step by step, inch by inch. They reached the column. Jace's hands were shaking so badly he could barely type. Lyra covered his hands with hers, steadying them. "Enter the sequence," she screamed. Jace keyed in the override. Alpha 9. Zulu. Break. The console chirped a rejection. System error. Biometric mismatch. "It is confused," Jace yelled. "The quantum flux is scrambling the sensors. It does not know if I am human or Sarathi." "It needs both," Lyra realized. "It needs a dual signature to override the lockdown." She ripped the glove off her right hand. "Lyra, do not!" Jace yelled. She slammed her bare hand onto the interface panel, skin against metal. Jace didn't hesitate. He ripped his own glove off and placed his hand over hers, interlacing their fingers, pressing their flesh into the sensor grid. The machine read them. But because the core was leaking high-energy exotic particles, it didn't just read their fingerprints, it read their nervous systems. It bridged the gap between their neural implants, using the FTL drive as a massive, unintended conductor. The world vanished. There was no ship, no core, no pain. There was only a flood of white light, and then the memories hit them like a tidal wave. Jace was not on the ship. He was 6 years old, standing in a dusty street on New Bristol. The air smelled of burnt fruit and cordite. He was looking down at a pile of rubble where a market stall used to be. He saw a hand sticking out of the debris, a hand wearing a watch he recognized. Elias. The grief was a physical blow, a hollowed-out crater in his chest that he had spent 20 years trying to fill with noise and danger. Lyra gasped. She was not Lyra. She was Jace. She felt the jagged, cold texture of his loneliness. She felt the way he used humor as a shield, a desperate attempt to keep the world from hurting him again. Then the scene shifted. Jace gasped. He was standing knee-deep in water that glowed a sickly, vibrant green. He was holding a small body in his arms. His sister. Her skin was burning, flaking away like ash. He felt Lyra's helplessness, a rage so hot it tasted like copper. He felt the moment she decided that love was a weakness, that only power could protect the things she cared about. They were drowning in each other's ghosts. But then, the current changed. Beneath the pain, there was something else. A warm, golden thread weaving through the darkness. Jace felt Lyra's admiration for him, the way she saw his kindness not as weakness, but as a terrifying kind of strength. He felt the moment in the zero-gravity corridor when she had almost kissed him, the spark of hope that had terrified her. Lyra felt Jace's awe. She saw herself through his eyes, not as a monster or a victim, but as something luminous and vital. She felt his desire raw and protective, and his certainty that she was the only person in the galaxy who really understood him. It was an intimacy deeper than touch, deeper than speech. They were stripped bare, their souls laid out on the operating table of the universe. "I see you." Jace's thought echoed in her mind. "I see you." Lyra's thought echoed back. And in that shared space, the fear evaporated. They were not alone. For the first time in their lives, they were completely, irrevocably understood. The connection gave them strength. It was a fuel more potent than the fusion drive. Together they pushed. In the physical world, their hands pressed down on the master lever. Dispersal protocol initiated. The screaming of the drive changed pitch. It went from a hysterical shriek to a deep, thrumming bass note. The energy that had been building toward an explosion was suddenly given a new path. The core vent opened, outside the ship. The stars stopped streaking. To the observers on the distant Sarathi listening post and the Terran stealth frigates lurking in the asteroid field, it looked like a miracle. The Aurora crown did not explode. Instead, it bloomed. A massive wave of coherent light erupted from the ship, not as a destructive fireball, but as a shimmering, multicolored aurora that rippled outward for thousands of kilometers. It washed over the nearby asteroids, painting them in harmless, breathtaking shades of violet, gold, and azure. It was a celestial firework display, a signal flare of survival that lit up the dark sector like a new dawn. Inside the chamber, the gravity stabilized, the time distortion snapped back into line. The wrench that had been floating in the hallway clattered to the floor. Jace and Lyra collapsed. They fell together, their ungloved hands still locked, their bodies steaming in the cooling air. The silence that followed was heavy and profound. "We did it," Jace wheezed, his voice barely a whisper. Lyra didn't answer. She just squeezed his hand, her eyes fluttering shut as the darkness finally claimed them. The waking was slow and white. Jace drifted up from the depths of unconsciousness, aware first of the smell of antiseptic, and then of a dull, throbbing ache in his entire body. He opened his eyes. He was in the medbay. A holographic monitor hovered above him, displaying vitals that were surprisingly stable. He tried to move his right arm, but it was anchored. He looked down. Lyra was in the bed next to him. She was covered in biogel bandages, her skin pale where it wasn't bruised. But she was alive, and her hand was clasping his. Even in sleep, she hadn't let go. Jace let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. "You are awake," a gruff voice said. Admiral Vance was sitting in a chair in the corner, looking tired but immaculate. She was holding a data pad. "Admiral," Jace croaked. "Status?" Vance stood up and walked over. She looked at the joined hands, and a flicker of softness crossed her iron face. "The ship is secure. Kale is in the brig. The engines are offline, but life support is green. A relief fleet is inbound, both Terran and Sarathi." "And the war?" Jace asked. Vance smirked. "Hard to start a war when 3 billion people just watched a live stream of their leaders conspiring to murder a ship full of civilians. The governments are in chaos. The defense minister resigned an hour ago. The Sarathi Council is holding emergency hearings." She tapped the data pad. "And you two," she added, turning the screen so Jace could see it. "You are trending." The screen showed a grainy image taken by a medbot when they were brought in. It showed Jace and Lyra on the stretchers, unconscious, soot-stained, battered, but their hands locked together in a grip that defied separation. The caption read, "The union that saved the Aurora." "Reckless idiots," Vance muttered, though her voice was thick with pride. "You nearly vaporized my retirement cruise." "I aim to please," Jace whispered. Lyra stirred next to him. Her eyes opened, blinking against the harsh light. She looked at Jace, then at their hands. "Did we win?" she whispered, her voice rasping. Jace squeezed her fingers. "Yeah, sweetheart. We won." Lyra closed her eyes again, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. "Good. Wake me up when we get to a planet that has decent coffee." The months that followed were a storm of a different kind. The truth did not set them free immediately. It put them in the center of a hurricane. The data Jace and Lyra had broadcast was damning. It triggered the largest political purge in a century. On Earth, military tribunals were convened. On Xylos, the High Council was dissolved and reformed. Lyra stood at the center of it. She testified before the Interstellar Court of Justice. She stood alone in a glass booth, wearing simple gray robes, and told the galaxy about the water on her colony, about Kale, about the bomb in the core. She was vilified by the extremists on both sides. To some humans, she was still the terrorist who hijacked a ship. To some Sarathi, she was the traitor who sold out the revolution. But she didn't face it alone. Every day of the trial, Jace Calder sat in the front row of the gallery. He had resigned from naval intelligence, publicly disavowing the agency's methods. He was her anchor. When she faltered, she looked at him, and he would nod, a silent reminder of what they had seen in the core. "You are not who they say you are," he told her one night in the safe house where they were being kept during the recess. "You are who you choose to be." "I do not know who that is yet," Lyra admitted, staring at her reflection. The bioluminescence on her skin was dim, uncertain. "That is the best part," Jace said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "It is a blank page. We get to write it, 6 months later." The orbital habitat of Station Theta 9 was neutral ground, a place where sunlight from twin stars, one yellow, one blue, mixed to create a sky of perpetual twilight. Jace stood on the balcony of their small apartment, leaning against the railing. He held 2 mugs of coffee. Lyra walked out to join him. She wore a simple tunic, her hair loose. The scars from the radiation burns were still visible on her arms, faint silvery lines that traced the path of the energy she had channeled. She didn't hide them anymore. "Coffee," Jace said, handing her a mug. "Thank you." They stood in silence, watching the twin suns rise over the curvature of the planet below. It was peaceful, boring, even. And it was perfect. "You know," Jace said, taking a sip, "I was reading the news. They are calling you a visionary of the new alliance now." Lyra snorted. "Last week I was a dangerous radical." "They cannot make up their minds." "Public opinion is fickle," Jace said, "but I have always been consistent." "Oh? And what is your opinion, Mr. Calder?" Jace turned to look at her. The morning light caught the amethyst of her eyes. "I think you are the most terrifyingly beautiful thing I have ever seen," he said, his voice dropping to that low, intimate register that still made her shiver. Lyra rolled her eyes, but she stepped closer, leaning into him. "You and your ridiculous human optimism," she murmured. "It is exhausted." "It is necessary," he countered. "Without my optimism, we would be space dust." Lyra rested her head on his shoulder. "It is the only thing that makes me believe in tomorrow," she admitted softly. Jace kissed the top of her head. "Speaking of tomorrow," he said, "I got a call." "From who?" "The Peace Corps. They have finished the refit on the Aurora Crown." Lyra pulled back to look at him. "They are not scrapping it?" "No. They are turning it into a mobile diplomatic and relief vessel, ferrying refugees, delivering medical supplies to the Outer Rim. Real work." "And?" Lyra asked. "And they need a security chief and a head of liaison operations." Lyra stared at him. "You want to go back? To that ship?" Jace shrugged. "The pay is terrible, the hours are long, and the ship has a history of mechanical failures and near-death experiences." "It sounds perfect," Lyra said, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Just one thing," Jace added, a mischievous glint in his eye. "What?" "If any terrorists try to hijack us this time, they had better be ready." Lyra laughed, a sound that was free of bitterness, clear as a bell. "I pity them," she said. "The passengers on that ship will be very reactive." The 1-year anniversary broadcast was beamed across the galaxy. The Aurora Crown looked different now. The gold and chrome were gone, replaced by functional white and the blue emblem of the new alliance. It sat in dry dock, ready to launch on a mission to bring vaccine synthesizers to the Sarathi colonies. The news anchor, a woman with kind eyes, looked into the camera. "It has been 1 year since the event that changed everything," she said. 1 year since a spaceship was hijacked by alien terrorists, unaware that the elite human passengers reacted and refused to play their assigned roles. The screen cut to a montage of the year's events, the treaty signings, the food drops, the dismantling of the border forts. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Aurora Crown, the anchor continued, is the lesson taught by two of those passengers. One human, one Sarathi. They remind us every day that love is the most unpredictable variable in any equation. And that sometimes, the only way to win a war is to refuse to fight it. The camera cut to a live feed from the observation deck of the Aurora Crown. It was the same viewing dome where they had first confessed their fears, where the stars had looked indifferent. Now, the stars looked like a map. Lyra and Jace stood by the glass. They were in uniform, functional, matching gray and blue. They weren't looking at the camera. They were looking at each other. "Ready to go?" Jace asked quietly. "Always," Lyra replied. She reached up, her hand cupping his cheek. Her bioluminescence pulsed a soft, steady gold, the color of home. Jace leaned down. They kissed. It wasn't a desperate collision like the first time, or a fearful goodbye like the second. It was a promise kept. It was slow, deep, and full of the quiet certainty of two people who had walked through hell and come out holding hands. As the ship's engines hummed to life, vibrating through the floor plates, they broke the kiss but didn't let go. They turned toward the stars, side by side, ready for whatever came next. Together.